Good evening. Welcome to the Democratic Voice, sponsored by the El Paso County Democratic Party. I'm your temporary host, subbing for Fred Hardy, who is out walking his precincts in County Commissioner District 3. My name is Tina Ruthier, and I'm first vice chair of the El Paso County Democratic Party. Right off the bat, let's make sure that everybody understands that the views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of the county party or Adelphia Cablevision. Before we introduce our guest tonight, I'd like to make a couple of observations about the coming weekend. Tomorrow is Friday, September the 1st, and begins the long weekend preceding our Labor Day holiday on Monday. A lot of us have forgotten that the Labor Day weekend is actually in support of our workforce, in particular our labor unions. Without our labor unions, most of us would not enjoy the benefits that we have now on the job, such as an 8-hour work day, a 40-hour normal pay work week, vacation times, medical and dental benefits, and many other things that the unions have achieved for us. Some people say that the unions are passé and are out of date and have served their purpose. I don't think so, because as long as the unions are around, we are guaranteed most of our benefits. Another thing to keep in mind is that President Clinton asked for a minimum wage and didn't get it increase and did not get it. The Vice President, Al Gore, is promising to ask for a minimum wage increase and is going to work very hard to get that increase for us. Remember that no one can make a good living and support themselves independently on the current minimum wage. Remember that come Labor Day, and keep your sons and daughters in mind, their future income, and write or call your congressman and your senators and encourage them to vote for the minimum wage increase next year when it comes up. This evening we have with us Renee Wahlberg, who is the Democratic candidate for State House of Representatives in District 18. That's Doug Dean's district. He is the current incumbent. Renee will also have a Libertarian opponent, Desiree Hickman. And for those of you who don't know where House District 18 is, it is basically north of UCCS on Austin Bluffs, or Garden of the Gods as the city has renamed it, east of Academy Boulevard, and it goes all the way to Old Ranch Roads. So basically it encompasses Chapel Hills and the Briargate area, the Pulpit Rock, and Garden Ranch area. That's a big district. It is also second only to House District 20 in conservatism, primarily because of organizations like Focus on the Family and the New Life Church and other organizations that are out there. So Renee, you've got your work cut out for you in running against Doug. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, thanks, Tina. I am 39 years old. I'm married, and I have 3 children who range in age from 10 up until 16. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota, which I got in 1983. I majored in urban studies with a concentration in human services and a minor in international economics. All that being said, that sounds real impressive on paper. The truth is, I've done a lot of things in my life to try to help keep our family together. I've worked selling Tupperware. I have worked in a balloon factory. I've worked as a switchboard operator. I've worked in a grocery store and was a member of the union. In my mostly postgraduate professional life, I've worked for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I've worked for Franciscan Children's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts for the Families Helping Families pilot program, which serves children who are medically fragile or high technology dependent and helps them to hook up with community respite care. I was a parent consultant to the Massachusetts Department of Health and their Pediatric Home Care Advisory Group. And up until this past December, here locally in Colorado, I was employed by Resources for Young Children and Families, which is the El Paso County Part C agency, which is early intervention, part of the special education system. Our family has provided foster care, and our youngest daughter was indeed adopted through the foster adopt system. I've served on the Family Support Council of the Resource Exchange, which is our local community center board, and I am currently a member of the Colorado Special Ed Advisory Committee, a member of the Children's Hospital Family Support Council, and I'm an officer and a board on Colorado Parent to Parent. I'm also a trained educational surrogate parent for foster children in Academy School District 20, and I serve as a special ed parent liaison in the district. Our family has participated in Food for Thought. These are dialogue dinners that occur when people from different religious and ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds get together and talk about issues that they may or may not have in common and agree to dialogue without fighting. I participated in and was a facilitator for last year's Community Conversations on Race. I've been a scout leader for both of my daughters and for my son, and enjoyed my time as a leader. And I'm currently a part-time choir director for Covenant Presbyterian Church and do some freelance writing. I have an article in an upcoming issue of a publication of the National Association of Play Therapists in Hospitals, which is in Tokyo, Japan. Thinking about why I decided to run for office, there's a couple of different reasons. One is philosophy. I firmly believe that all voters in Colorado have a right to a choice in their candidates. And I didn't want to see Doug Dean run unopposed. The best gift I ever got for my 18th birthday was a voter registration card in my birthday card from one of my mother's best friends who's a lifelong member of the League of Women Voters. I wouldn't say that we share the same political philosophies, but we do share a commitment and a dedication to voting. The most important thing that I can give to my children is the impetus to tell them that this is a right and it's a responsibility. Don't lose it. Go out and vote. Because I believe so strongly in voting, that's why I stood to go forward and run for the House District Seat 18. My experience with my two youngest children, who both have severe disabilities, gave me both the educational background and the motivation to want to run for office. I have had to balance and to coordinate the educational, the medical, and the governmental social services systems for the past 13 years, and I have found it challenging at best and at times downright daunting. And I have a background in human services, and I have found it difficult. So I'm running because I want the children of this state to have a representative looking out for their interests, looking out for those family interests.
That's a good reason, and I applaud your being a foster parent. That takes a lot of courage and a lot of stamina to become a foster parent, with knowing that you're not going to keep that child. In your case, I believe you mentioned that you were able to adopt.
Yep.
How long did you have her?
Our daughter became our foster child when she was 2.5, and by the time the adoption went through, she was 7, going on 8.
That's remarkable. Congratulations on obtaining her.
Thank you.
Your special needs children, I think, puts an emphasis on the schools to supply them with schooling. Do you find that you get a lot of questions when you're out about the ADA and children in the public schools and the tax dollars? And you know where I'm headed on this.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of confusion out there. There are people who will unintentionally pit special education families against regular education families. And one of the things that I want to look at as a legislator is combined funding streams. Now, this is kind of controversial and with good justification so. When education funding streams were combined before, in the old days, before there was a federal law guaranteeing the right of children with disabilities to a free and appropriate public education, usually what that meant is that if your child had a disability, they didn't get an education.
Right.
1975, PL 94-142 was the public law that was passed guaranteeing the education rights of all children with disabilities, and it's now called IDEA. I do spend a lot of time as a special ed liaison talking with families about the emphasis has to be on quality education for all of our children. If my child has a special need, but they're going to a school that is having difficulties and is struggling, it doesn't matter if they have a right to all of these different educational programs. Everybody in that school has to have a high quality education. If everybody doesn't get a high quality education, nobody gets a high quality education.
Well, let me ask you this now. I know that the public schools get some federal dollars for the children with special needs. Most of the support dollars come from our property taxes and state funding. Does the state legislature allocate any money for special needs, or is it strictly federal funds?
Most of the funding comes from the local school district. Special education has never been fully funded at the federal level the way it was intended to be funded, nor has it been funded at adequate levels at the state level. By increasing funding for all education and increasing the quality of those programs, I think we can benefit both special education students and regular education students.
Well, I think this leads me into my next question. One of the things that you as a candidate are constantly asked by PAC groups and newspapers are, what legislature would you like to see passed if you become our representative from 18? Most of the legislators are expected to either sponsor or co-sponsor 5 different acts and get them passed. Personally, I think that's way too many. I think if they spent more time on fewer numbers, we might get more accomplished. But I'm assuming that somewhere along there you would like to see some changes made in funding for the schools.
Well, my biggest concern right now about education is not necessarily a special education issue. It's the governor's plan to use the CSAP to give every school a letter grade. Now, my opponent believes that this is an adequate way of informing families of how their schools are doing. I think that this is simplistic at best and misleading at worst. That you would take a single arbitrary test taken on a random day by all students and then judge the performance of the school based solely on that unproven test. If I were a securities analyst, or I'm looking at my own personal stock portfolio and I'm trying to decide, am I going to invest in a company? I would look at many indicators, not just one indicator about how that company was doing in order to judge whether or not I felt that company was succeeding and whether I wanted to invest my hard-earned money in it. Don't the children of Colorado deserve just as much attention as we put into our investments?
That's one of my major points with the governor. I mean, he talks a good fight, but when this bill passed, I wasn't sure whether they were going to score the children, going to score the teachers, or if they were scoring the building. It's very misleading, the entire bill.
It is. The intent is to grade how the teachers are educating the children. It's not supposed to be grading the children. It's supposed to be showing what the children are learning. It gets very complicated. I've spoken with dozens of educators who teach in talented and gifted programs, special ed teachers, regular classroom teachers. Everybody comes at it with a different perspective. they're very confused. They don't all know exactly how it's supposed to be used. And if the people who are administrating the tests don't understand how it's supposed to be used, I hate to think how we're going to actually use the results.
Well, I don't suppose that you're going to spend your entire time on education matters. Are there some other areas that interest you? I think one was an environmental issue, was it not?
Yes, I have lived in a variety of different states over the years, and I have truly enjoyed my time in Colorado. We have been here since 1994. One of the things that disturbed me, however, was that we have this beautiful place to live with these gorgeous mountains to look at, and an awful lot of trash and litter on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that trash and litter that I see are discarded bottles and discarded cans. Now, I was speaking with a constituent, a potential constituent, when I am the legislator, and she was talking to me about this issue, and she asked if I would be willing to sponsor a deposit law. And I would be very willing to sponsor a deposit law. For those of you who've never lived any place that have one of these, what it is basically is if you buy a 6-pack of Coke or of beer or bottles of 2-liter bottles of soda pop, you're going to put a nickel or a dime deposit on each of those cans or bottles. It sounds like it's adding a lot to the cost of your entertainment drinks. But what happens then is instead of just regular recycling, which we do have in Colorado Springs, you would take those bottles and those cans back to the grocery store and you would redeem them. You would get your nickel back for each of those things. What it does to improve the litter is that there's always people who are out picking them up from the people who've thrown them out onto the side of the road because they know that that's cash in hand.
Well, you know, that's not that's not a new idea.
No.
I might be dating myself, but I can remember as a child going around and collecting milk bottles and Coca-Cola bottles and Dr. Pepper bottles and taking them down to the local market and redeeming them for my candy money.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one way to put some cash into your children's pockets is to get them to recycling.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea, and I know there are several states that have it, particularly on the West Coast. What else would you like to see?
Well, I know that there was a piece of legislation that was introduced last year and did not pass that I would be very interested in reintroducing either as a sponsor or a co-sponsor. But what it is it's called a visitability law. And what this would do is, for example, my son uses a wheelchair. I have adult friends who are wheelchair users. Because it is difficult to get a wheelchair user into a home that does not have a ramp or doesn't have wide doorways or a lift, what ends up happening is the family who has the person using a wheelchair in it ends up being the host and hostess for everything. What a visitability law would do is it would enable anyone to, at their own expense, improve their home by adding a ramp, by widening a doorway, putting rails up perhaps in a place where a person who used canes and couldn't negotiate stairs without extra rails, any kind of home improvement. And what I would like to see happen is that those families would then get, gradually over the next 5 years, a tax credit to help compensate for the cost of the home improvement.
Well, speaking of tax credit, there is an amendment by our favorite Tabor person, Doug Bruce, to issue to put on the make it part of the Constitution that there would be $25 a year refunded on property taxes on your automobile, property taxes, and various other things. I'm concerned about that particular bill. I live in the county, and my fire support comes from a local fire protection district, and we struggle for funds to maintain that district as it stands, and you start talking about refunding $25 a household a year until that tax is eliminated. We've got problems. How do you feel about that?
Well, my biggest concern with the amendment is the fact that it's tinkering with the state constitution. I know the Democrats don't have a reputation as being a conservative party, but I would think that changing the state constitution ought to be saved for something that is extremely important and generalized over the course of time. Tax laws come and go. They change depending on economies, depending on local communities' needs and or desires. To make it a constitutional amendment change, I just don't think is very prudent.
I think I agree with you. We should be lobbying our legislators for reductions in state taxes at that level. We should be lobbying our county commissioners, our city council, our local governing officials to lower taxes here.
Yes.
I agree with you. I don't like tampering with the Constitution. And Democrats are very fervent about protecting the constitutions. I think we
Yes.
were probably the first vocal advocates of protecting our free speech rights and supporting Dr. Martin Luther King in equal rights for everyone. So I agree with you. Are there any other initiatives that are on the ballot that...
Well, I have some concerns about the growth initiative. The growth initiative sounds really appealing. We're all living with sprawl. We're all living with traffic congestion. I can understand people's desires to want to control that. And I do think that growth that is not managed is a problem. But again, I'm not sure that this initiative is the way to go about it. I truly believe that this is a local control issue. What works for Denver does not necessarily work for Colorado Springs, does not necessarily work for the San Luis Valley, and doesn't necessarily work for the Western Slope. One size fits all legislation just doesn't make sense when it comes to something like this. The other thing that I personally have a concern about is that I'm very concerned about the availability of moderate and low-income housing. Now, you know, call me silly if I go back to my economics background, but the basic laws of supply and demand work here. If you limit the amount of land that can be built upon, the price and the value of that land then goes up, which if you already live there makes it a really nice thing.
Right.
You get nice tax, you know, nice high property values, and you have a nice place to live, and that's great, but it prices out the working families of our community. And I don't want to see our community to become a strictly upper middle class, white collar type community. I think we need all kinds of people living here, and everybody has a right to affordable housing for their families.
Well, I think this is a good time to point out that it is the Republican legislators who have brought us 186 on the schools and who are proposing this growth limitation. Both of these are statewide. All politics is local. Colorado is a home rule state, and I'm all for keeping our schools local and keeping our growth control local.
Well, and another local issue that I have concerns about, that both of my opponents actually support statewide permits for concealed weapons. Now, I actually don't really have a problem with concealed weapon permits. If a gun owner who already owns a gun steps forward and says, hey, I own a gun and I would like to carry that weapon, as far as I'm concerned, they probably have a right to do so. I haven't seen any statistics one way or the other, but I think that that should be up to local communities. The way it's set up now is that the local sheriff determines who gets and who doesn't get a permit to carry a concealed weapon. Now, it was set up that way, we assume, because a local sheriff would know the people in his or her community better than some anonymous state agency.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I haven't read the initiative, but I would like to see some type of uniformity so that if I go in and request a concealed carry permit, that if I go to Denver, my gun's not going to get taken away from me, or I'm not going to get thrown in the pokey,
Right.
because
And there needs to be a way so that citizens aren't breaking the law. But at the same time, Denver should have a right to be able to decide their rules
Right.
for safety, like Manitou Springs versus El Paso County in general. And there should be a way to compromise on that.
Well,
whether it is bringing out your paperwork that shows that you have a right to carry it in your county or whatever.
Well, if Denver doesn't want a concealed weapons permit issued, period, that's their decision. But we as in El Paso County do have that right, and our sheriff controls who gets it. He does a very thorough background check.
At
I
a minimum,
understand.
they need to post it so that you know that you're not breaking the law.
Why don't you take this opportunity to tell people how they can reach you, how to get in touch with your campaign to offer support and aid?
I am very available. My telephone number, if you'd like to work with my campaign, is 719-210-5752, or you can write to me at P.O. Box 63326, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80962, and you can address that to me personally or to the committee to elect Renee Wahlberg. We're always looking for volunteers. You can contact me by email. That's reneewalbert@go.com, and you should be able to check my website within a week, and that would be reneewalbert.org.
Let's do it again. Telephone number is?
Telephone number is 719-210-5752.
Email?
reneewalbert@go.com.
Thank you, Renee, for joining us tonight. And I'd like to thank the party for allowing us to do this, and Adelphi Cablevision. If you would like to get in touch with any of the local Democratic candidates, you can call party headquarters at 473-8713. Again, that's 473-8713. And Renee's telephone number is 719-210-5752. Remember, our government is a direct reflection of ourselves. A vote not cast in November is a vote wasted. Thank you from the Democratic Voice, the El Paso County Democratic Party, and me, Tina Ruthier. Good night.